Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, from here in Manila, where I'm connecting from Asia, or good morning if you're connecting from America. Everyone, and welcome to this special International Archives Week 2025 webinar. It's the 7th edition, and the subject of the webinar is Access and Integrity in the Digital Age, Archives, AI, and Authenticity. I'm Gustavo Castañer. I'm the head of unit of Information Resources and Services at the Asian Development Bank, and I also serve as the Vice President Finance of the International Council on Archives. We're really delighted to have you with us in plentiful numbers as part of International Archives Week 2025. This year's theme, Archives are accessible, archives are for everyone, invites us to reflect on how we can break down barriers, technological, systemic, and social, to ensure that archives truly serve all communities. Today's session brings together experts from across the archival and digital preservation field to explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping access to archives and how can we maintain authenticity and trust in this rapidly evolving landscape. Thank you for joining us. Let's dive into this important conversation with some practical pointers. Multilingual access and closed captions. To make this session more accessible, Zoom's automated closed captions are available. You can activate them at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select your preferred language for live translation. Format and flow. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to present. We have decided to group all the questions at the end. And we invite you to share your thoughts and questions, and this is perhaps an important indication, in the questions and answers box, not so much the normal chat box of Zoom. If you basically question and answers, please, and we'll deal with all these questions at the end. So before we start, thanking all the speakers who responded to our call and to the global ICA community for continuing to celebrate and advocate for accessible archives. So without further ado, we will start with the first presentation. We have three excellent presenters, and we have with us Sengsavang. She's a reference archivist at UNESCO. She's a graduate of the University of British Columbia Archival Studies program and the co-author with James Boyle of Record Keeping in International Organizations, Archives in Transition in Digital Network Environments. And Ing will present about digitization and AI for access to archives. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you to the ICA for hosting this excellent webinar series. I'm just going to share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Sorry, I'm just putting it into presenter mode. Okay. So today I will be talking about digitization and AI for access to archives. And what I will be talking about is specifically a survey on digitization and AI that sheds some light on this topic of both the state of digitization within organizations and how some organizations are using AI. And then I will be sharing some thoughts on strategies for AI in a digitization project, including some attainable approaches for organizations. And I will also be describing some experiments in how UNESCO is using that. So sorry, I'm also just trying to turn on my timer, but that's okay. I'll just keep track of the time with my phone. So the survey that I will be talking about today is part of an academic research project called Inter Pares Trust AI. It's an international project, and it's part of a study that specifically focuses on artificial intelligence in the context of digitization of documentary heritage materials. And the survey measures the state of digitization within organizations and the impact of AI on digitization activities. It was conducted in mid-2023 and received 217 responses. And then we just published the survey report. It took us a while because, well, we used a lot of qualitative data, and we're all very busy. So we just published the report, and there's a link to the report there. So there were 4 sections to the survey. I'm not going to go over all of them. I just wanted to show you how this survey was organized. And I will be talking about some highlights related to our topic of access and also integrity and authenticity as well. So just to set the stage, well, first of all, I also wanted to give credit to the study team. We are mostly based in Canada, in Europe, the University of South Africa. Yeah, so these are my team members. So I'm just going to start by talking about the demographics, who responded to the survey, who's behind the responses in the survey. So in terms of the countries where the organizations were located, the respondents' organizations, they were mostly based in North America and in Europe. As you can see, there's a very kind of extreme bias towards North American and European viewpoints. And this is partly the limitation of our dissemination in terms of listservs that we contacted. And also the survey was only in English, unfortunately. So that's something that we openly acknowledge. So in terms of the professional profile of respondents, it was mostly archivists and librarians, over 50%, and then also digitization specialists and technicians, which was quite nice to have, as well as records managers, and then other types of respondents, professional profiles. We also have, in terms of the types of organizations that the respondents work in, most are from public and governmental organizations, but also private, NGO, and IGO. So just to also establish the framework of what we understand by digitization, there's a technical definition of digitization, which is the process of creating a digital representation of a physical artifact through scanning or photographing it, or signal conversion from analog to digital. So that's the technical definition. But we have a broader definition of digitization because digitization involves a lot of activities before and after this digital conversion process. And we see that these activities as part of an integral part of digitization, because you can't really do digitization without all of these other activities. And this is also based on several different international standards for digitization, or national standards, such as the federal agency's digitization guidelines initiative of the US. And we also focus on digitization of archives to create a faithful digital reproduction of the original for long-term preservation. So there's different kinds of digitization. You can scan a document because you just need a copy of it to read on your phone or something, or to send to somebody. But this is really digitization for long-term preservation. And it should be, we're talking about digital reproduction that is as faithful to the original as possible, so that if, goodness forbid, anything were to happen to the original, then the digital copy could stand in for the original. And this idea of digitization also connects up with the concepts of integrity and authenticity that we're talking about. And then, of course, I'll get more into the access part of it later in this presentation. So also just a bit more on digitization. It's a highly valued activity within organizations. 94.4% of respondents agree that it's either very important or an important activity for the preservation of and access to documentary heritage materials. And it's also widely practiced within organizations. 92.2% of organizations have engaged in digitization programs or projects in the last 5 years. So that's quite an overwhelming majority of respondents. And in terms of some of the successes of digitization projects or programs, these really reflect some of the primary motivators that respondents also expressed in terms of why do we digitize materials. And one of the biggest, the biggest reason that organizations want to digitize their materials is for increased access to archives. So, this idea that there is often a physical barrier to accessing archives, and digitization can really help to increase access to that. It can also, in terms of greatest successes, increase the visibility and outreach and use of those archives, because once the archives are online, theoretically, they can be used all around the world by different researchers. Participants also stated that the volume of collections, that they're quite proud of what they were able to digitize and the sheer volume that they were able to digitize. And then in terms of challenges, there's some quite obvious ones like funding and resources, staffing, and project and program management. And then there were also some potential risks or drawbacks of digitization. So, this isn't, often digitization is spoken of as if it was the answer to everything, and that's not the case. We want to also acknowledge and recognize that there are still some challenges or risks or drawbacks of digitization. Some people mentioned how if you digitize a collection and put it online, often the impression is that that is the only thing that's available in your archives. So there's representational bias with digitization. There's also the digital divide. So not everybody has free access to, a computer or a Wi-Fi network and these kinds of things. So a couple of other, just to get into a bit more detail, sustainability concerns were a big risk or drawback of digitization, especially in terms of thinking about the environment, as well as having to manage over the long term these, the digital assets that you're creating, and also copyright risks, which we'll get into later with Karyn's presentation. And so I'm going to jump into digitization and artificial intelligence now. So one of the questions, the main question in the survey is, what percentage of respondents' organizations have used either in-house AI or off-the-shelf AI tools during their digitization projects? It was just over a quarter of respondents. I'm sure the number is bigger now. The percentage would be bigger now. And there was slightly more of that quarter of respondents that used off-the-shelf AI tools versus in-house custom developed AI tools, which makes sense because a lot of organizations don't have the capacity to develop their own AI tools. And so this question is about describing the types of machine learning that organizations used within their digitization projects. As we would expect, there weren't really any big surprises in terms of how organizations used AI. A lot of them are using AI supported OCR and HTR, which is kind of a huge area of development right now. There was a lot of speech to text transcription and computer vision, as well as topic classification, language identification. And then participants also responded by the type of digitization activity that they're using AI for. And so also not surprisingly, the biggest top four were metadata creation, image processing, writing code, and searching or filtering metadata. So these are the types of activities or functions that AI is supporting right now. And just some examples of some use cases from participants. So for example, AI for OCR, HTR, there was one participant who was working with the Brno University of Technology to develop Paro OCR system for manuscripts, old prints, low quality scans. There are some really interesting cases. So there's an organization that is using developing AI tools to generate structural metadata. People are using off-the-shelf tools, for example, Google Vision to detect objects and images. There's Python for cropping images out of album pages, which is quite interesting as well. And then, yeah, AI for quality control. So, quality control is such a huge aspect of digitization. And there's one organization who's using AI to automatically detect skew or warp or bad OCR when doing quality control in digitization. And there's some more use cases too. I'm probably going to skip this because I'm just aware of the time. But yeah, there's of course AI for audiovisual transcription. There's AI for data analysis, so topic classification and concept and entity identification. A lot of people are using ChatGPT. So there's one where they're using ChatGPT to construct a semantic index inquiry using natural language. So yeah, so some interesting ways that organizations are using it. So then we also asked, how did AI help, or did it help? And respondents said that AI helped to improve efficiency and searchability, as well as discoverability, or generally resulted in greater access to collections. And then there are also ways that AI hindered the digitization process. So a lot of people mentioned negative results, including inaccuracy in terms of metadata creation or metadata enhancement. There was poor quality of OCR. People mentioned that AI is time-consuming to implement, and it can be costly. And in general, the generated metadata could be unuseful, and that there was still a need for human checking. A slightly related but different question was about the risks of AI. So the first question was, has your organization identified any potential risks or drawbacks of using AI in digitization? So what's interesting is that a very large majority, well, almost half of respondents, about 45%, said they weren't sure. So it could be that the archival or records management or digitization units aren't quite connected to what is happening in terms of AI use or governance within their organizations. Only 19.7% of respondents replied that yes, their organization has identified risks of using AI, and a larger percentage said no, 35%. They had not identified risks. So for those who had identified risks, what was mentioned, the types of risks that were mentioned were bias and ethical concerns, the inaccuracy of AI tools, again, the lack of transparency, and again, the need for human control, and data privacy was also a risk as well. So there's just some quotes that I found interesting. Somebody said that it has to be clear to the user what is human-created description and what is more speculative AI-generated. Another organization said that they've thought about using facial recognition technology for photos, but that ethical considerations prevented them from pursuing that at the time. And they're asking, how can we guarantee that Amazon or Google won't sell our data? And at the same time, they don't have the capacity to start building their own from the ground up. So implying that, they would be reliant on a big private for-profit enterprise such as Amazon or Google. And then another person mentioned inherent biases and the toxicity of the digitized material and how that could be perpetuated by models trained on it. And so the material has to be used with care and only in the right context. So interesting comments. And lastly on the survey, tools with the greatest potential benefits. And we asked this because, thinking about the future and thinking about future, supporting future development of AI. So, yeah. So again, people thought that OCR HCR would be the most helpful, as well as AI tools for metadata and automatic transcription and classification and tagging. So you kind of see the same types of tools or models pop up here. Oops, okay. So in conclusion, AI tools do have the potential to enhance access, searchability, and discoverability of collections. And organizations are also motivated by the potential for AI to alleviate and enhance human labor. And in the context specifically of digitization, for AI to help with digitization workflows and automating labor-intensive tasks. But it sounds like organizations are still at an early stage of uptake and risk analysis in using AI tools. So I'm going to just go over, sorry, I think I'm 2 minutes over my time. So I'm just going to wrap up very quickly now. I'll just take 1 more minute. So some strategies for kind of incorporating responsible AI in digitization projects that I think are doable is transparency and documentation. So documenting the tools that you're using to create and process that, especially when when you're using off-the-shelf tools or your own open source tools. There's also risk assessments that are available for AI, and reviewing AI regulations and guidelines either at a supranational or national level, partnering with research institutions and AI specialists to develop the capacity to do that, and as a way to incorporate some experimentation and research. And then foster robust discourse and exchange. We can learn from organizations at a more mature stage of digitization. And I think I'm out of time, actually, so I won't be able to go into digitization and AI in the UNESCO archives, but we are doing some of the things that I talked about within the survey. So automatic keyword tagging and speech to text. We're just kind of at an early stage of trying to incorporate that into actual workflows. And thank you very much. I'm sorry I went over time.
Thank you. Thank you, Eng, and thank you also for the synthesizing effort in a very rich presentation. So without further ado, we go with the second presentation. Remember that we are tabling the questions at the end. And for the second presentation, and send these questions to the Q&A box, we have Frederik Temmermans. Frederik Temmermans is guest professor in multimedia at the Department of Electronics and Informatics, associated with the Vrije Universiteit Brussels and EMEC. His research focuses on media privacy, security, authenticity, and integrity. He's been involved in various research projects in the medical, mobile, and cultural domains. He's an active member of the JPEG Standardization Committee, where he currently chairs the JPEG Systems and Integration Subgroup and leads the JPEG Trust standardization activities. He's also co-founder of the Vrije Universiteit, a spin-off company Universum Digitalis, and member of the Photoconsortium steering committee. Frederik will be presenting to us about media authenticity in the age of AI, building trust and transparency in digital cultural heritage. Over to you, Frederik. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and let's dive right in. So this is a picture that I took almost exactly a year ago at the Louvre in Paris. And it's always nice to be physically in a museum and to admire the pieces of art that they have. But sometimes, like in this case, as you can see in the picture, it's not that trivial to admire the little details up close. But luckily, these days, if you look online for many artworks, you can find actually very high quality, high resolution images where you can inspect little details of these paintings in so much detail that even if you would be able to be with your nose against the canvas, you will almost not be able to see them. But if you look for the Mona Lisa, for example, online on Google, you will see that you will find a lot of variations, some of them being the actual Mona Lisa of Da Vinci, and also some from other painters, and even memes with cats and these kind of things. But even if you look at the ones that actually represent the Mona Lisa by Da Vinci, you will see that there's a lot of difference between those images in terms of colors, in terms of details you see, and even in shape. And here is another example. These are two pictures of the Tower of Babel of Bruegel. And both of these pictures are super high resolution and are both taken approximately around the same point in time. And we know that paintings, they change over time. Paint might fade, and there might be some colorization of the varnish. But in this case, the differences that you can see, I hope it's visible on the screen, but they're quite severe in terms of contrast and color and so on, are due to the circumstances when the digitization happened, the equipment that was used, the lighting that was used, and so on. In the case of Inside Bruegel, if you go to the website, you will be able to find all of the details about the camera that was used, the lighting system that was used, the image processing that was used, and so on. So you do have reference points there. On the Google Art project, on the other hand, we don't have any of these details. And why is this information important? It's what we call the paradata. It's more than just the metadata. It's all the information about the circumstances under which the digitization took place. This is absolutely needed if in the future we want to be able to compare different captures over taken at different moments in time. So why does it matter? Art, like paintings, are dynamic objects. As I said, they change over time, and every time you digitize them, it's a static capture at a certain moment in time. In addition, if we talk about paintings, we typically look at them as 2D objects, but they're not. Paintings are 3D objects, and what you're actually looking at are 2D projections. So you don't actually have the exact shapes correctly when capturing them. So all these circumstances, the equipment, the practices that are used, the actual setting, even environmental settings like the temperature, for example, the software that is used, they all impact the final result. And if you want to make a scientific assessment, if you want to be able to make comparisons in a scientific correct manner, you need to have access to all of this paradata. Now, today it's getting even more complex with AI, and we can use AI to significantly improve quality of digitizations, and here are some examples of tools for colorization, for restoration, and to increase the resolution of the images. But with all of these, you can raise some questions. And the first one of Marilyn Monroe, the result is nice, but are these colors that you see actually accurate? In the second one, for example, if you look at the shape of the shirt, it's interesting, but is that actually authentic? And if you look at the last one, I think the result is impressive. But if you look at the texture of the skin, for example, is that even real? Because these details are not there in the original image. And the answer to most of these questions is no, it's not authentic, and it's not necessarily a correct representation of reality. And what's even more, the results are actually that good that it becomes really complicated to distinguish between what is real and what is fake, or what's generated by AI. So does it mean that we should fear and avoid AI? Well, personally, I think it's absolutely not the case. I think we should absolutely embrace it and take advantage of the possibilities that AI provides it. But what is crucial is that we're absolutely transparent about the use of AI and the role that AI plays in the digitization process. Now, how do we do that in practice? So the information that we need is provenance information. We need as much information as we can about the camera that was used or the software that was used to generate something or to process something, the time, location, all these things that provide us more information about the background. And with metadata, which is captured by cameras, for example, a lot of that is already captured almost automatically, but that's still not enough. So let's look into that in a little bit more detail. So if you take a picture with a camera, like the one I showed in the beginning at the Louvre last year, some of the information is captured automatically, like the date, even the GPS location, the camera that was used, the settings that were used, and so on. Problem is, if you share such an image online, or if you move it from one system to another, all of that metadata information is not necessarily preserved. So if you share something, then it might be that this metadata is actually stripped off. And what's even more problematic is that this metadata is quite trivial to change. So in this example, if you change the date from last year to this year, you can do that, and with most current implementations, nobody would be able to even notice that this information was changed. So it's not reliable. Does it mean that the typical metadata is not valuable at all? No, that's not the case. It does provide some information about authenticity in certain cases, but you have to be careful with the consideration and with the interpretation of it. So it's fine in a closed environment where everything is controlled, or if you have a reliable source. But if you rely on images and their associated metadata from media that you find online, you need to be careful with that. And then the question is, how can we improve from that situation? And there's two things that we really need to change. First one is securing of the metadata. So we should be able to identify if information has changed. And we should also be able to know who validated the metadata which is associated to the content. And secondly, the metadata that I've mentioned, so the creation data and the camera and all of the settings, that's useful, but it's not enough. So we need the entire provenance change, a persistent change of information that documents the creation details, so the typical metadata from the camera, but also all of this paradata that I've mentioned before, as well as all of the changes that happen to the media since its creation. So not just the starting point, but everything since the creation, still the moment that you're admiring it or consuming it. So in practice, what we want to do and what we do with standards, and I'll come back to that in a moment, is to cryptographically sign the metadata and the content. What that means in practice is that you can check who has validated that metadata and the binding with the content, and also that you can identify if changes are made. So if something changes to the metadata or if something changes to the content, you will be able to identify that. That's already one point which is crucial. On the other hand, this information can still be removed from media. You can also take screenshots and so on. These are things that, at least at this moment, we cannot do much about in most situations. So what we actually want to achieve in the future is that we will have a future where all of the media that we encounter online, or at least the ones that have relevance in terms of archiving, in terms of cultural meaning, or in context of news publications, for example, do have this type of verified credentials and can actually be validated. And all the media that does not have this information, well, basically we cannot consider it trustworthy. So that's basically the vision for the future, but of course we're not there yet. And if we want to achieve that future, then key to that is interoperability. There's many ways that you can achieve this, but if you want to achieve it as a community, if you want to achieve it together, then there is a need for standards. And that's exactly one of the things that we're currently working on within the JPEG Standardization Committee under the name of an activity which is JPEG Trust. So it's a framework to establish trust in media, focusing on this aspects of authenticity, provenance, integrity, and so on. Now, one of the questions that you might ask is, oh no, why yet another standard? That's not really the idea. The idea is to connect the dots and to build together with all the other consortia on a sustainable framework for authenticity and trustworthiness of media. Some of you might be familiar with C2PA content credentials, for example. So JPEG Trust, for example, does use C2PA for embedding provenance information. Everything with C2PA metadata is compatible with JPEG Trust and also the other way around. And same applies to other metadata standards. We do use Dublin Core metadata. We do use W3C, ODRL, and so on. And we bring all of these pieces together to build one consistent framework. A second question that you might ask is, who are you as a standardization body to tell us if something is trustworthy or not? And the short answer to that is we can't. We can't say if something is trustworthy or not. And the reason of that is because whether something is trustworthy or not depends on the context. And the easiest way to show that is with an example. In this case of a damaged car. If I would have an accident with my car and I share an image of the damage with my family and they know the image comes from me, then they will have no doubt that the image is authentic and the story is actually true. If I share the same image with my insurance company, well, maybe they also want to check if this picture was actually taken with a camera, if it was taken at the correct time and at the correct location before they actually consider it as evidence. So the trust indicators for this image to be considered trustworthy is different for my personal situation than for the insurance company. And that's the foundation of JPEG Trust, or one of the foundational ideas. And in this first part of JPEG Trust Accord Foundation, we handle this annotation of provenance, evaluation of trust indicators, also taking privacy and security into account, and then something that we've recently added, also intellectual property rights are closely related and should be taken into account. So for annotating provenance, as I've mentioned, we do use C2PA. It's a standard for annotating provenance compatible with what I have explained before. And it is already adopted by some new camera systems, and also online, more and more you will find content that adopts this, and all of this also is compatible with JPEG Trust. Then we have the entire framework for extracting trust indicators and evaluating them so that users can be informed about if something was taken with a camera, if something was generated by AI, if something has been modified, and so on. And then the end users, they themselves can make an evaluation and decide if they consider something trustworthy or not. And then handling privacy and security. In some cases, you don't want to disclose everything. Actors are important. Who has taken a picture can be of relevance in some scenarios, but in other scenarios, you actually want to protect that information. So that's also something which is taken into account. And then IPR, authorship, ownership, rights, expression, that's a whole topic of its own, and I'm not able to go into detail at this moment, but it's closely related to authenticity, of course. So it's also a specific track that we're handling in within JPEG Trust in much detail. So where are we now with this standardization effort? This first part that I have discussed, the Accord Foundation, actually became an international standard early this year in January 2025. And currently we're already working on a second edition, which also includes this IPR features that I've mentioned. And then in addition, we're also working on additional topics such as watermarking and reference software implementations, which are currently ongoing. So there's a lot of more information that you can find on this initiative on the JPEG website. It's jpeg.org, and you're also free to contact me or my colleagues if you're interested to get some more information. For now, I just want to conclude once again with this slide. So please embrace AI, use it to its fullest potential, but take care that you're also transparent about it and communicate with your users in a clear and honest way. So that's it from my side, and I'll be happy to answer your questions after the last presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederik. Thanks for an excellent presentation about the need for radical trustworthiness in this brave new world of AI modified and altered images. And as we said, we have all the questions at the end, but you can send them to the chat box. We go with our third and last presentation. We have for the presentation Karyn Williamson from the Digital Preservation Coalition. She's a qualified and registered archivist that also has managed to run the Explore Your Archive campaign, and she's the author of the Digital Preservation Coalition Toolkit for Community Archives. Karyn will be presenting to us about From Access to Assurance, Digital Preservation in Practice. Over to you, Karyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you to the ICA for inviting the DPC to get involved in this event. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about access in a more general level, how it links in with digital preservation work. And so much so that I think I'd like to make the case that access can't be sustained without long-term digital preservation of your digital collections. However, it should never be forgotten that the whole reason we provide access is for our users, and without users there is no point in providing access. So access, as you'll all know, is a really multifaceted issue, and in many cases, budget, resource and landscape an organisation is working within can have a great impact on the type of access that is provided. So we'll talk a bit about the main things to think about when looking at providing access, and then move on to look at a framework that will help you assess your readiness to provide access. So, starting with what access actually is. The definition we use centres around the user and the processes that allow users to decide what they want to access, how they want to access it, and how they understand their options for that access. And we then need to think about this in terms of how the processes that enable these actions will interact with your organisation, your preserved digital content, your systems for providing access, and the end users. But what is the most important part of access? It makes sense that the user would be the most important aspect, because they are who we do all of this for. The organisations we work for, however, would argue that finance or resources or organisational culture would equally be the most important aspect, as there's not much that can be done without them. But there is one other aspect of access that is absolutely imperative to the process. In fact, without it, there would be no process at all, and there's no prizes for guessing what aspect that is. The digital content itself. Without it, there's nothing to provide access to. And this is the singular reason why digital preservation is so important to access, because there is no access without it. But where does the path to access start? So the Sound of Music fans among you will know that Maria advised that the beginning is a very good place to start, and she wasn't wrong. Although access is the end of the journey, it needs to be thought about at every stage of your digital preservation process. The information and the data that you gather at every stage of the process will be essential in deciding how you will provide access once you have preserved and stabilised your records. But how do you know what to think about in terms of access, and where do you start? So we would suggest starting with the user and really thinking about what that means. Good access works best if you start with the user and work backwards. All content should be available to all users, including those with impairments or disabilities, as equitably as possible. And knowing what's needed allows you to build up a plan for how you will get there, even if it's not all immediately possible within your budget and resource. Starting with the information you already have about any current users or those who have requested access but have been denied access in the past is a good place to start when thinking about how you will go on to provide access. Additional research may be required, but this is an important step and shouldn't be overlooked. The questions on this slide should help you make a start on this task, but the DPC also has a guidance note on assessing user needs if you need further support with this. It's also important to think outside the box about the types of user you might have. A prime example being the work of AI and machines as user. So where automation or AI may be used in processes, it can help you to think of the machine as a user and assess its user needs as you would with humans. For example, are you providing the right data in a readable format? Does it have the permissions that you want it to? Do you even want it to have permissions? It's also worth thinking about computational access. Do you want to provide access to datasets and tools for researchers to work on and interpret? And if so, are the correct systems and software being preserved in order to provide both machine and computational access as appropriate? It's also useful to know where you are currently from a technical point of view. This focuses more on your current setup and how things actually work, which again allows for gap analysis and finding any issues already there early in your process. Looking at the various platforms in use, how they intersect, where they don't, what is reaching end of life, and what may want to be carried over into future processes is a useful exercise. It's also worth comparing your discovery provision with your access provision. Do the two work together? A lot of the questions on this slide will relate to how you carry out digital preservation tasks, which highlights the earlier point that access will not work without sustainable digital preservation. The work you do to preserve your digital collections for the long term is the backbone of the access that you will provide at the end of that work. Security was also mentioned on the previous slide, but it's so important that it deserves a slide all of its own. Next to accessibility, it's one of the most important things to think about, as the repercussions of getting it wrong could be catastrophic for you and for your users. Security reviews and risk assessments of all access options being considered should be carried out and well documented. Working in collaboration with IT and any other departments involved in the Towards Access workflow. So things to think about here include some of the stuff on the slide and some additional points. So if you're having access copies, are they going to be stored and processed separately to the originals? Are you going to store different metadata with each different copy? And what about access controls? Do you have different level of access for different users? Do you need this? Do you not? Are you going to be carrying out risk assessments on antivirus, cybersecurity measures, ransomware and software? This is an important step, and a regular process documentation, review and edit will also help keep your collection secure. How will you handle your system updates? How will you handle fixity and authenticity checking of your access copies? And what about the differences between online and offline access? So, for example, are you providing in-person access to digital collections? And if so, you might use a workstation for this. Will these PCs be networked or not? Do external ports have to be blocked? Can people make their own copies? And if not, how do they get copies if they need them? Have you thought about admin logins versus non-admin logins? And if you're looking to provide access online, how will the access controls on each collection or item be made clear? Will users be able to download material? Will you use watermarks? Will data be collected that allows you to audit what users are doing and how they're doing it? Do you have provision for staff training for both these access options if you want to use both? Both how these things work and then how they will communicate this to your users. Do you need encryption? And if so, how will that work with the type of access that we've provided? Now, I've not been talking for that long, but we've covered a lot of ground. And if you're anything like me, you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by it all. And it would be really useful at this point to have a structured way to work through all these questions and thoughts in a way that aligns with the digital preservation work that you are currently doing. And luckily, help is at hand. DPC RAM is a rapid assessment model developed by the Digital Preservation Coalition with support from the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. It's a tool which allows you to assess your digital preservation readiness. You fill in the information about your current digital preservation organisational and service capabilities. You give yourself a current score, and then you give a score to the target for each area that you'd like to reach. And this allows you to see exactly where you currently are and where you want to be. And it also allows you to work on a plan to get there. The DPC RAM outputs can also be expressed as a very snazzy graph, which is a great advocacy tool to advocate for more staff or resources. But in relation to this presentation, RAM can also help you in a range of ways with planning to provide access. Completing a RAM assessment will enable you to map your access wants and needs onto the work you are doing, which will help you develop a plan for how you will get to where you want to be in terms of access. This will help you to embed access within your digital preservation workflow, with the end goal of ensuring the correct access processes and systems are in place for you and your users. So when you're thinking about access, we would suggest completing your RAM assessment by starting with the last section, which is K down the bottom, Discovery and Access. This helps you start with where you are and where you want to be, and then you complete the assessment with your goals in mind. So I'd like to finish by offering some top tips, just in case you're still a little bit overwhelmed by everything that's discussed. Then this is the slide to focus on. So access is complicated and there is no one-size-fits-all option. One thing that always helps us is always keep in mind open to all, but access to who. Start with your users and work backward to identify a roadmap to meet their needs. Think about all your access points and how they're going to intersect with each other. Decide what metadata, metrics, and statistics you want to capture and work these into your roadmap. And use DPC RAM to help you put a structured plan in place to allow you to prioritise and work on access needs in an organised way that works for your users and your organisation. So I will stop there. Thank you for listening to me. I'm happy to take any questions, and I think that's the bit we're going to move on to just now. So thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you, Karyn, for a very interesting presentation and a very, very relevant topic indeed. And thanks to all the presenters for their excellent presentations. I think if they can open their cameras, we will start. I understand that already some of the questions have been answered in the questions and answer. We still 6 of them, in fact, and we still have 3 open. So we have a question on staff capacity, capability, and access to funding and training that can be a barrier for digitization if your archive is small or not funded. How can we tackle this? So I guess this one, it would be for Ing or whomever wants to take it.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, I think that's probably the #1 question that everybody wants to know. Even if you're from a big organization, you can still struggle with funding, with buy-in, and with capacity for digitization. I can only say what worked for us. There may be some tools available in terms of funding for smaller organizations for digitization projects. And of course, I say that acknowledging that you also need to have the staff capacity to be able to apply for funding and to do fundraising. That's a whole other job in and of itself. But I think you can also try to develop the capacity to digitize yourself, starting with small collections. But for UNESCO, what worked for us is that, well, first of all, we had supportive management who recognized and took the archive seriously. And I don't know if that's the situation for all archives, unfortunately, but that's really a key ingredient. And then also, we had a very influential and high-level advocate for us in the archives who decided that she was going to make the archives her mission to help us raise funds. And that was really also a key. So yeah, unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all for every organization. But I think also another way is partnerships, because partnerships are often free. And it means that you can get support from other types of organizations, private organizations, digitization vendors, who could potentially be interested in digitizing your archives and help you to find funding. That's kind of another model that you can do. So those are my suggestions and comments. And thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have another question here. Getting buy-in from other departments, if your archive is in a bigger organization, can be a problem. How can we advocate for the importance of archives within organizations? Any of you? But well, yeah. Whomever wants
I
to
think I
take it.
sort of addressed that question, but maybe
Very
Karyn and Frederik have some other thoughts as well
Very good.
on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid. Any more thoughts on that?
I think in terms of advocacy, it's quite important to know your organization and what it's motivated by. So you might have an organization that's very risk averse, and therefore pointing out the risks of not investing in this area is going to get through to them. But you may also have an organization that's motivated by reputation, so the reputational risks are going to get through to them more. You may have an organization that's more focused on the human aspect and sort of showing the benefits of the work that you're doing. There's definitely more than one way to advocate, but I think knowing your audience is the most important thing. And I also think I would just echo Ang's comments about partnerships. I think that's a really strong way forward, especially for those that have got low budgets and low resources. We've seen a lot of groups achieve so much more together, and sometimes even just showing what other groups are doing is a really strong advocacy case as well, because nobody wants to be left behind.
Thank you. Taking now one that just appeared, but more for possibly for Frederik. Would you know of an AI tool that can automatically help track all export or save as information that takes place from an original TIFF scan? Very specific question indeed.
Yeah, so I think first of all you have to distinguish between the typical embedded information that's available, that's recorded by the camera, some recorded by Photoshop. If you do editing, Photoshop will add some metadata to it. And yes, there are tools to automatically extract that and interpret that and get some meaning out of that, even with basic common tools like ChatGPT. To some extent will be able to do that. But the bigger problem is that a lot of this information, if you take a TIFF, do some editing to it and save it again, that in many cases, at least until now, is that this information is not saved. So it will not keep track of what exactly has changed, what modifications have been made. So once it is saved, it's a new file. And what existed before that is actually lost, at least in a standalone file that is left over. And that's basically the problem that we try to solve with this provenance information. With provenance information, you do not only keep the new file, but also you keep the traces of what has changed and how it looked originally. So even if you compose two different images, that's what we call ingredients, you can get back to these. So it depends on what exactly you want to do, and at least also for the future, we hope that you will be able to extract much more information as what you practically can today.
Thank you, Frederik. And I think Ing was answering a last question that perhaps could be used to close. How do we balance AI with environmental balance? What's the answer here? And coming, my institution is a development bank, quite interested in climate change and how to deal with it. The AI brings a lot of possibilities, but what are the costs and how do we balance? And what do you see on this? Anything that you want to say on that?
A lot of the processing for AI is happening in the cloud, and if you look at the big players, the big companies, they're investing a lot in trying to make these net zero, so with solar power and so on. So at least there we're moving in a good direction. On the other hand, I think you also have to balance advantages and disadvantages against each other. Yes, like AI in general is quite computational expensive, but it also delivers improvements in efficiency, and this efficiency also results in a net improvement in our environmental cost and other savings. So you have to look at the entire picture. Environment is one thing, but also economically and time saving and so on. And net, in many cases, I think we still have a positive win.
I'll just
Very
add
good.
that just
Yeah.
today, UNEP, the UN Environment Program, just released a sustainable procurement guidelines for data centers and servers. And so these are guidelines for governments to implement ways to measure the environmental impact, but also for effectiveness of using water, power, and renewable energy in data centers. So I just sent that link to the question. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. And we have I think, now a final question as a kind of follow-up to this one. How can AI solutions be scaled to handle ever-increasing volumes of digitized and born digital archival materials? So we have every time more. How do we scale AI to answer this challenge? It's a difficult one. Eh?
I think at the moment it's still balanced with Moore's law. So every 2 years, the amount of computational power that we have doubles. If you look at the amount of data, that's also increasing with a similar amount. So at this point, I think it's still in balance. Also, the algorithms that we use for processing multimedia are getting much more efficient, so we can process much more with less computational effort. So I don't think it really is a bottleneck at this point, or that it soon will become a bottleneck, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, very good. So unless you want to add something else, thanks again to you three for 3 excellent presentations, and encourage all the audience to follow the activities of the International Archives Week. Thank you very much, and stay in touch. Thank you.
Thanks to you for organizing this, and thank you to the audience for joining us today.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, everyone.